as in Elizabeth Holmes' low baritone voice. But man, she nailed it. Can you imagine changing your voice just to be able to be taken seriously? Hey Zesties! Welcome to a new episode of the Gleeful Talkshow, where we share zesty stories to cultivate the happiness and hero within and out. We were left off with a lot of questions on the previous episode about the recent events that occurred about Theranos and what actually was fact versus fiction on the Dropout show. But before we dig into it, I'd encourage you, Zesties, to please rate, subscribe, or review this podcast, or do all of the above, as it will definitely help the show out. If you'd like to keep me caffeinated, I have a link on my episode notes where you'll be able to do that. Big shout out to Rarusuchin for keeping me caffeinated for almost a year now, so thank you very much. If you have episode recommendations, feel free to slide me a DM on my socials, that's at Gleeful Talkshow, or shoot me a note to gleefultalkshow@gmail.com. As I mentioned before, Zesties, I've come across this Silicon Valley scandal because I watched the show Dropout at Disney Plus. I've slightly heard about the name Elizabeth Holmes on the news before, but I didn't really dig into it that much. But because of the show, it has really piqued my interest. Hence, we are here today talking about it. Speaking of the Dropout show, are you curious on how accurate or inaccurate it has depicted the real life events? If not, yeah, you don't really have a choice because I'm gonna talk about it anyway. Spoiler alert, though, for those who haven't seen the show. Disclaimer, the show is not really a documentary per se, but it's more of a creative take on what transpired during closed doors with all the public information that the creators could find. They were also filming the show during the time that the trial was being litigated, which is such a hard thing to pull off, don't you think? As you know, new information is available whilst the show is being made. I mentioned in the previous episode that Elizabeth met Sunny Balwani on a trip to Beijing when she was 18. As real with double E as it sounds, this is definitely REAL real. They both met on the Chinese language exchange program at Stanford. Although we don't really know exactly whether they met at the pantry, as the show has depicted, but Balwani was married at that time, and it wasn't really clearly depicted in the show as well, so it was kind of like a gray area. The show also depicted Elizabeth being sexually assaulted during her sophomore year, which is actually true. In fact, she reported the incident in October of 2003, 5 months before she dropped out. The only difference is that in the show, she didn't report it to authorities, or I don't know if I remember it correctly, but it didn't strike to me, or I couldn't remember it specifically. But she did mention it to her mother, and her mother shushed her, unfortunately. The Dropout show also showed that Dr. Phyllis Gardner was one of the first people that Elizabeth approached about her idea and dismissed her due to the idea not scientifically possible yet. I saw the real professor on her interviews, and I have to say the actress who played her did a really great job in exuding the kind of aura that the professor has in real life. So kudos to Marie Metcalf who played her. I also mentioned that Elizabeth had a lot of prominent men on her board of directors at Theranos. One I didn't mention was Don Lucas, who is actually one of the richest venture capitalists in the US. When I watched the show, I said to myself, How can a 19-year-old kid fool one of the richest venture capitalists in the Western world? Well, turns out, Zesties, she had connections. Her dad. Remember her dad, where I mentioned at the last episode about Enron? Well, the show only indicated that she got the meeting because she said something about, quote, he'll be missing out on a $7 billion business, unquote. However, in reality, she had her connections. The bad ones, though. Nonetheless, it did her good. How audacious, though, you know? Can I have an inch of your audacity, Elizabeth? But in hindsight, no thanks. I'd rather have a clean conscience than having such a 7 billion non-existing product. Also, it was also true that she was able to fool Walgreens. Again, what an audacious attempt. Yeah, I really can't imagine how someone could have that confidence. Anyway, there were also subtle nuances in the show that you might think that it was a nice touch, but no, they were actually true. One of which was Elizabeth's obsession about Steve Jobs, from calling Theranos the iPod of healthcare to the point of copying Apple CEO's fashion statement. Yes, Zesties, that iconic Steve Jobs black turtleneck. Steve Jobs once said in an interview that he owned about 100 black turtlenecks made by the Japanese designer Issei Miyake. When I first read about this, I figured that name sounds familiar. And yes, this designer also has perfumes, and for those who know me, I am a sucker for perfumes. Apparently, for Jobs, it wasn't just a turtleneck, it was a uniform. After paying a visit to Japan to visit Chairman Akio Morita at the Sony offices in the 80s, Job became infatuated by the fact that all employees in the Japan Sony offices wore uniforms. This was largely from the fallout of World War II, where a large portion of the working classes in Japan didn't have professional clothes, and the companies supplying their employees with everyday work attire. These uniforms eventually acquired their own style and became a way for company employees to bond. Jobs saw this as an opportunity for Apple employees, but the employees weren't a fan. Well, it does make sense because Japanese culture or Asian culture in general and Western culture are hugely different. And we can even talk about that on another day. But yes, they are widely different. So that's why the Apple employees in America were not a fan of it. Anyway, I got a little off tangent there, but back to Elizabeth Holmes and Theranos. Elizabeth was so obsessed with Apple that she also hired two other Apple employees, one of which is Anna Ariola, the product designer who worked on the iPhone design. She got so convinced with Holmes that she left Apple and throwing out 50,000 K worth of shares. From what I read, Elizabeth asked her about Steve Jobs' fashion. Another Apple employee that was poached by Theranos was Avi Tevanian. I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing that correctly. I'm so sorry. But yes, Avi, who joined the Theranos board. How the show depicted his resignation was pretty close to what happened in real life, too. In the show, there were subtle depictions of how manipulative or not manipulative her lover Sunny Balwani is. I can understand that the show doesn't want to assume this, given that they were filming during the time of the trial as well. It is also a safer and better take, I feel. But I did love how the show incorporated this because the real Elizabeth in her trial testimony did say that Balwani obsessively controlled her diet, business decisions, and clothing and wanted her to consistently drink green juice. Maybe it's just she was not eating well. Maybe that's why he wanted her to drink green juice, but just speculating. The real Elizabeth said that, quote, he told me that I didn't know what I was doing in business, that my convictions were wrong, and that he was astonished at my mediocrity. And if followed my instincts, I was going to fail, unquote. Well, we don't really know how true or untrue this is, given that the current Elizabeth is playing pity with the jury and the public. More on that later. But yes, the green juice obsession is real, Zesties. Speaking of amusing real life Theranos happenings, the awkward bathroom incident shown on the Dropout show did actually happen. This was when the Walgreens lab consultant Kevin Hunter visited Theranos to check their labs and their technology. But because Theranos didn't have a functional lab and tech and are so desperate to not show any of it, to the point that Balwani followed Kevin Hunter when he went to the bathroom in order to prevent him from sneaking off to look at the labs. Zesties, who says that real life isn't as interesting as the movies, right? Was an awkward moment, really. But what's more astonishing to me is the voice. The Dropout show revealed how Elizabeth morphed to the voice that she currently has, and Amanda Seyfried nailed it. She totally nailed it. She did say in an interview that she couldn't go that low, as in Elizabeth Holmes' low baritone voice. But man, she nailed it. Can you imagine changing your voice just to be able to be taken seriously? Well, there are studies that do show that. But how sad the world is then, where women would need to be and sound like men in order to be taken seriously. I thought that we are trying to get away from that. Gender equality, right? Diversity and inclusion. But I felt like with her doing this just confirmed that society isn't fully ready yet for women, and even some women themselves. She dressed up like Steve Jobs, sounded like a man like Steve Jobs, had mannerisms like a man. So, just really, it's just so sad. So, for me, women should not make her as a role model, as brilliant as she is, minus the fraud and lies, Because aside from that, she's actually not representing the boss lady that we women need. If you have watched the Johnny Depp Amber Heard trial, Camille Vasquez is the boss lady that we all need to look up to. She still retained her feminine, high pitched voice, still had a feminine look and even the hairdo, but she still sounded and looked competent. That's what we should strive for. And she is competent. So, yes, Zesties, we should look up to Camille Vasquez. But then, here's what I can rationalize why she did that. Perhaps her coach and lover, Balwani, a man, told her that she's going to be taken seriously when she will do all those things, low baritone voice and dress up like a man and all that stuff. And I guess maybe they were leaning more on the studies that are available out there. And in fact, a study about voice based assessment of trustworthiness, competence, and warmth in blind and sighted adults show that speakers with low voice pitch are typically perceived as being more competent and trustworthy than voices with raised pitch. The caveat for this is that raised pitch voices were judged as warmer, but only for women's voices. I've included a link on the episode notes about this study if you want to know more. So, perhaps this was what happened, but we never really know for sure what's going on in their minds, right? I mean, even with the deposition videos, these are somehow skewed as to what the person being interviewed wanted to convey. Anyhow, there were still more real life moments that the show depicted quite accurately, but the most devastating of all was the death of Ian Gibbons. He was the chief chemist at Theranos and he did die by suicide out of fear of having to tell the truth about Theranos in a court deposition. It was also true that Ian was fired for voicing concerns about the accuracy of the tech with multiple people, including board member and friend Channing Robertson. Similarly, in the show, he was fired and rehired later that same day, but remained demoted until his death. This is the most upsetting thing to me. Justice for Ian Gibbons. I don't know if you can sue someone for contributing to suicide. Because, Ian Gibbons actually was a survivor of cancer, but ultimately, he died on his own hands because of Theranos. What a very, very sad way to die. I hope he will be given justice.
One eternity later.
Okay, Zesties, now off to the real life events outside of the Dropout show. The fraud trial of Elizabeth Holmes began with jury selection on the 31st of August last year, 2021, and opening statements on 8th of September. The reason this has been delayed for over a year was because of COVID and her pregnancy. Take note, Zesties, her pregnancy. Wow. At the very last moment, Elizabeth pulled off a power move. I don't know if this was an accidental pregnancy, but what a great coincidence, right? To be pregnant when you were supposed to be on a trial. Can you imagine the impact of putting a pregnant woman or a new mother on the stand? I know what you're thinking, Zesties. In the weeks that followed, jurors heard from 32 witnesses, including Holmes and Erika Cheung, in proceedings that featured dramatic allegations of abuse and long days discussing scientific terminologies. On the 12th of October, prosecutors showed a key piece of evidence, which is Theranos' technology validation reports bearing logos of Pfizer, Schering, Plough, and GlaxoSmithKline. Theranos had used the reports to solicit investors and commercial partners, even though those pharmaceutical companies had neither approved nor prepared those reports. OMG, such fraudsters. On the 23rd of November, Holmes said that she added the logos to the reports, and this was actually the first time she acknowledged any personal involvement in the document. But the funny thing is, she said that she added those logos to the reports because it was done in partnership with those companies and was trying to convey that. I mean, again, she's really playing the innocent here, Zesties. You have a legal team in your company, for goodness sake. For sure, they would have discussed the implications with you. But Elizabeth Holmes did it nonetheless. But then on the 29th of November, she undressed her boss lady persona and broke down to tears with a wavering voice and accused Sunny Balwani, her then lover and COO, of emotional and physical abuse. Now again, playing the damsel in distress here. It's just so funny how people can just easily push the blame to others and when it comes to the demise of something and then claim all the glory when it comes to something working out perfectly. Balwani and Holmes supposedly were charged with fraud together, but a federal judge separated their trials in 2020 after Holmes alleged Balwani had emotionally and sexually abused her. I mean, Zesties, we never know what happened in closed doors, right? But take note that they were romantically linked together for over 10 years, with Theranos employees saying that Balwani looked at Holmes with awe in his eyes. So I don't know. In closing arguments on the 16th of December, the prosecutor, Mr. Cheung, argued that Holmes deliberately deceived investors, patients, and advertisers with the pharmaceutical validation reports, faked technology demonstrations, and inaccurate marketing material, saying she chose fraud over business failure. However, Holmes' defense argued that she acted in good faith and had believed her employees' positive feedback about the technology, that investors had known their bets were risky, and that her statements had been misunderstood. Wow, talk about shifting the blame to the nth power. And we all know that a lot of employees have already been reporting about the technology not working yet. But still, they had the audacity to put this as defense. Anyway, her latest verdict was that she was found guilty on 4 out of 11 charges of fraud. Wow, wow again, only 4. The damsel in distress stint actually did work, eh? Just wow. She awaits her sentencing this coming September. Each charge carries a maximum 20 years and a fine of $250,000. As much as I wanted her to spend the maximum time in prison, I have a grave feeling it's not gonna be maximum. I just have a feeling. She has a quote unquote powerful family after all, and she has a compelling case of being a damsel in distress. I just hope the justice system doesn't fall for it. And you know what's wowing to me? The separate trial of Balwani, who found guilty of 12 counts of wire fraud and conspiracy to commit wire fraud. Interesting. Still puts me in awe how the CEO of the company got only 4 out of 11 whilst the COO got 12. Astonishing. Isn't it that the CEO is the most liable of what the company has done? Take note that Balwani injected cash to Theranos as well. To be clear, I'm not siding with Balwani here. I'm just astonished as to how the verdict came about, where clearly they were conspirators. So that's food for thought for you, Zesties. Why? Anyhow, we'll end the episode on a positive note. Where is Erika Cheung now? If you remember, Erika, the young lab associate, was one of the whistleblowers that prompted the investigation. Oh, my hope in humanity is restored. She is now the co-founder at Ethics and Entrepreneurship, an organization that provides investors, entrepreneurs, and workers with resources to better recognize and manage ethical issues in emerging companies. I feel like, on a nutshell, it's like a company that will be able to help people connected with a startup company determine the ethical and legitimacy of its practices, which was what Theranos lacked. She describes herself as a medical researcher turned technology and innovation ecosystem builder. Well, good on you, Erika. Good on you. What about Tyler Schultz? He was not asked to testify against Holmes, and it was only Erika as he thinks his emails spoke for themselves. Currently, Schultz is running his own biotech startup, Flux Biosciences Inc., focused on women's fertility issues. While he said he would never become an Elizabeth Holmes, but he concedes that as a startup founder himself, he understands the high-pressure context that might create an Elizabeth Holmes. And I guess, Zesties, it would all boil down to one's conviction if they allow themselves to succumb to being fraudulent. And also, the people you surround with too matters as well. In 2017, Schultz was named to Forbes 30 Under 30 list for those in the healthcare industry. By the way, his grandfather, George Schultz, never formally apologized to him, but he did say that his grandson was right and they reconciled before his grandfather died. I hope you Zesties find this episode interesting and insightful. If you like the episode or the show, don't forget to rate, share, and subscribe to this podcast in your favorite podcasting platform. A lot of you might just listen to this via Google Chrome through the website, and I'm eternally grateful. What do you think of the website? Feel free to share it to your friends too, as it will definitely help the show out. Follow me on Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, and YouTube. That's at Gleeful Talkshow. Although I'm not as active on social media nowadays, but feel free to follow. Or you can send in your episode recommendations to gleefultalkshow@gmail.com. Until then, as Confucius said, Our greatest glory is not in never falling, but in rising every time we fall. See ya!